Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm rahozah, and if this is the first time that you're seeing my face, then welcome. It's so nice to have you here on the channel. So today's video is me summarizing, breaking down, and interpreting Neville Goddard's 9th book called Seedtime and Harvest. If you guys are just seeing me for the first time, then I have a playlist on my channel where I go through books number 1 to 10 and I summarize them all, and I'll leave the playlist linked in the description below as well as above, so you can definitely check that out. Make sure you watch book number 1 to 8 before you come over here, book number 9. Now, let's jump right in to the content of his 9th book. So chapter number 1 is called The End of a Golden String. So he starts off this book by talking about the Bible, and he talks about how the Bible cannot be read like any other book because it's written in the language of symbolism, and the characters are just personifications of the laws and the functions of the mind. So he says to view the Bible instead of as history, to look at it as a psychological drama that affects each of our lives today, that shows us the laws and the functions of the human mind. Now, he says that the purpose of this book is not to just decode all of the symbology that is in the Bible. I know that the teaching and the wisdom of Kabbalah does this. It decodes the Old Testament. And I grew up with my parents studying the wisdom of Kabbalah, so I have like a fun foundational understanding of a lot of the stories and the symbology and what it means in our lives and stuff like that. But very much beyond the scope of this book and Neville's teaching, he really just has the purpose and intention, as he says, to share the way that you are most likely to succeed in realizing your desires, right? So that's his intention in writing all this and bringing in the Old Testament and the New Testament and all the stories, is to just express the things that he finds to be the most valuable, the most important, that we can take and practically use in order to manifest our desires into reality. He says that the way we do this, to sum everything up, to sum up all his teachings, is that we realize our desires through voluntarily exercising our imagination with the laws of the mind. And this realm of imagination is also like a code or symbol for the Garden of Eden. And he says that imagination is Eden, and it is vaster than you know. Chapter 2 is called The Four Mighty Ones. So the four mighty ones were mentioned a couple times in the Bible, but he explains that these four mighty ones are really aspects of the human mind and the human soul that exist in every man. So it's not separate beings, but he says it's separated the same way that our fingers are separated from our hand. They just have different functions and they differ in character. So he says that these are also equated to the Yud-He Vav-He, which is the Tetragrammaton, and the name of the creative power. It is that I am essence that lives within us. It is the 4 quarters of the human soul. So he compares these 4 aspects of mind to the production of a play, so we can simplify it, kind of understand it as it relates to an actual theater in a play. So the 4 aspects are the producer, the author, the director, and the actor. So the producer is the one who suggests the theme of the play. So that is just the general ideas. And as we know, a theme is very general, it's very broad. So at some point we need to actually bring those ideas and make them specific. Like, we can have a general idea, I want to be successful, but what does success mean to you? You know, what are the logistics of that? So he says the producer's role is simply to just suggest the theme. That's all its role is. All right, then we have the author. So the author, he says, writes only the last scene of the play, but he writes it in detail. So this way we know how our story ends. We know that the wish fulfilled is already written out for us. That is the role of the author. It dramatizes the wish fulfilled. It mentally constructs a lifelike scene with the realization of our desire. When the scene is clearly visualized, then the author's job is done. Then the third aspect is the director. The director is the one who sees that the actor remains faithful to the script and rehearses them over and over and over again until he is neutral. He keeps the controlled conscious attention to the action that implies the wish fulfilled. So the director is kind of like in between both the producer and author and then the actor, making sure that the actor is complying with the producer and author's declaration of what this movie, what the person's life is about. The director is like the onlooker, looking on, making sure, keeping the actor accountable to, persisting in reaffirming this new reality that has been set out by the producer and author. Now, the actor is what we would call human imagination. The actor performs in imagination the predetermined action that implies the wish fulfillment on a loop. So whatever the producer and author within ourselves declares, "This is what I desire." It is the actor's job, that part of us that is our human imagination. It is up to us to exercise our imagination and repeat on a loop the desire over and over and over again until it takes on tones of reality. He says, without dramatizing the fulfilled desire, then the theme remains simply just a theme and it sleeps with all other unborn themes. So it's up to us. It is in our hands as the actor in our life, the main character in our life, to not just think about what we want, to be the producer and to be the author of what we want, but to also ensure, with the director aspect of ourselves, the observer aspect, that we are using our actual imagination. We're not just thinking about it, but we're using our imagination to really feel into our visualization and our desire being realized with all the tones of reality so it feels natural to us. He says the drama of life is a joint effort of the four quarters of the human soul. All of life is a reflection of the internal, contrived by these four aspects of self. The external world is informing him of the themes that he has just conceived, dramatized, rehearsed, and performed within himself. So in other words, this external world is purely feedback to you on how these four quarters of mind have been working for you up until this point. Without the consciousness, man will always just act unconsciously and cry out to an objective God to save him, not realizing that his external world is a result of his own inner creation. He says life is just a play that you are consciously or unconsciously writing. If you want a different outcome, then rewrite the play to conform to your ideal. The people that are in your world are just players and are as helpless to change your external world the same way that if you're watching a movie, are the actors on the scene able to change the picture that is being shown. He says that the other people in your reality are basically just as helpless as if you were to go into an actual movie theater screen and tell the actors to, change, rearrange the movie, change the picture that's showing up. It doesn't work like that. The players, the actors that are on the screen, are just playing out the role that the director and author set out for them to play. The actors just have to fulfill that role. The director made sure that those actors are fulfilling their role. You can't just change it once it's been declared. So this, in the same way, the people in our life are just players. You have assigned them a role. But what that also means is if you understand that, you take that responsibility, you understand you've assigned them these roles, that also means that you can change it. You have the power within you by using your imagination. He says when imagination has completed the task of rehearsing revised versions of the players until it's natural, then the curtain will rise upon this seemingly solid world and people externally will automatically play their parts to bring about the fulfillment of your dramatized theme, believing that they themselves initiated the parts that they play. Chapter 3 is called The Gift of Faith. So he begins this chapter with a Bible verse that says, "And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offerings, but unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect." From Genesis 4:4-5. So, like everything in the Bible, he is saying that Cain and Abel, these two brothers, are really just codes of personifications of two distinct functions of your own consciousness, or two contrary states of the human soul. So Cain represents the limited perception of the senses, the illusionary world, and feeling unsatisfied in life. While Abel represents the vision of your fulfilled desire, the world of imaginations, lifting above the senses to the state of relief and no longer desiring things because you're living in the imaginative state where your desire is already fulfilled. You can see beyond the illusion of the 3D world. So that's the difference between Cain and Abel. So with the Cain consciousness, the Lord, which is our higher consciousness, our higher self, the God that lives within us, is said to reject the gift, which means when you are living with the Cain consciousness, which is solely experiencing life through the perception of the senses, it will perpetuate the same present state forever. So if you consider yourself to be sick in the 3D world and you don't have this consciousness of rising above the 3D world, you're going to stay sick because you're going to continue to perpetuate the story of I'm sick. The poor stay poor, right? And when you continue with this Cain consciousness, only looking at what is rather than what you desire to be, then there is no hope of redemption. When you're looking strictly from the senses, you're being passive with your imagination. You're not using the power that you hold with the gift that we have of Abel, of our imagination that we have as humans to rise above our senses. We have that gift that animals do not have. It is once you exercise your imagination that the Lord, or your higher self, your higher consciousness, your subconscious mind, realizes your desire. He says, let man disregard appearances and declare himself to be the man he wants to be. See beauty where his senses see ashes. See riches where your senses see poverty. Only by this active voluntary use of imagination can man be lifted to fulfill his ideal. Our ideal is always waiting to be incarnated by us, but it's up to us to bring that fulfillment into reality by imagining ourselves, using our imagination, flexing that imaginative muscle to really get ourselves to be in that state. So he shares a quick story here of a little boy who was born into this world with a huge birthmark covering half of his face. And it said that multiple doctors told the parents that it can't be changed. There's nothing that can, help him remove this birthmark. But his aunt was studying with Neville Goddard, and she really wanted to prove the working of this law, that through denied evidence of the senses, if she persists in the new story, that it will harden into fact. So what she did, she wanted to test out this law. So every time she thought of her nephew, which was often, she saw a perfect face. She persisted in this thought, right? Because every single time she thought of him, she thought about, this baby has a perfect face and he's perfect and nothing was wrong. She basically ignored the quote unquote reality that we would see with our senses. He says the result was after 8 months, she reunited with the baby and he had perfectly unblemished skin without a trace of a birthmark ever being present. When you just blindly accept the evidence of your senses, you bring Cain into your consciousness and you will see no change in your life. You are here, he says, to live an abundant life. So you must be able to use the invisible molds of imagination and make your own results and accomplishments. Chapter 4 is called The Scale of Being. So he gives a quick story of Jacob and how Jacob had a dream, and in this deep sleep, his inner eye was opened and he viewed the world as a vertical scale of a series of ascending and descending levels of awareness, values, and states of consciousness. So here he emphasizes the point that everything in life has meaning and significance, but the meaning and significance found within things can only be found on different levels of consciousness. The level of significance that a man can see in a thing shows his level of consciousness. So this book, for example, if I were to read this book on a low level of consciousness, what is present is just letters on a page. On a higher level of consciousness, it is a portrayer of meaning. Its meaning is of high value, and meaning is above the level of visible arrangement of letters. So the arrangement of letters is just the low level consciousness, the 3D world, what we can see physically. But meaning is not physical. It's not something we see. It's something that we have to use our imagination for it. We have to have a higher level of consciousness and awareness to be able to decipher meaning within things. And he says what is true of this book is true of every event in this world. The same way that man arranges letters into words and words into sentences, and those sentences express meaning, in the same way, life arranges circumstances and conditions and events to express the unseen meanings or attitudes. The objects and events in time and space occupy a lower level of significance than the level of meaning which produce them. Meaning, this 3D world is the things we just see with our senses, the things that we visibly see with our logic, with our senses. It's of lower and lesser significance than the cause of all those things, which is the meaning, the intention, the consciousness behind the thing that created those things. When we know there's meaning behind everything, we know that there's no coincidences. Nothing is a mistake. There is a cause for everything going on that is happening in this unseen realm. Everything seen can be regarded as the effect, not the cause of an unseen higher order of significance. Usually, what does man do? Man tries to explain why things happen in terms of the lower, in terms of the 3D, the physical event, and why it happened. So he gives the example of a car accident. When we ask ourselves, why did this car accident happen? On a physical level, we can see a car hit another car. That's that's all we see, that's what we know. But when we ask, why did it happen? That's when our mind has to open up to a higher level of consciousness. We have to look beyond what we're just seeing physically, become aware of an invisible state of consciousness, and see that consciousness was the source of what had happened. He says maybe the woman was living in a consciousness of loss, both personally and financially. So Because she was living in a state of loss, she attracted or added another event to reproduce another seeming loss, right? Neville just shares this as an example, but really we don't see the full picture. We don't know the full cause. We are not fully living in that endless realm. Yes, we can tap into it at some times way more than other times, but while we are still conditioned, we do not see that full entirety, that entire picture. But Neville's saying we are able to tap into that why. He says when we see the why, we learn that there is no accident, that our states of consciousness produce everything in the 3D world, and everything has invisible meaning. So when you explain the what and the how this accident happened, those explanations are also true. We know what happened, we know how it happened. It's not false that this thing happened, but it's on a lower level of thought. So on this scale of truth, it just exists on a lower level of thought, right? Which is why so many truths can exist, just depending on what level of consciousness are you looking at the event from. But when we're asked why did this happen, that's when the physical explanation breaks down and we're forced to seek the invisible. We're forced to expand our awareness to a higher level. So our intuition is needed to lift us up and see what ideas we have accepted as true. What states have we consented to? He says that our events that happen in our external world appear on the screen of space to express different levels of consciousness. And a change in consciousness automatically results in a change of life. Chapter 5 is called The Game of Life. He says life is a game, and like every game, it has its aims and it has its rules. In a real game, sometimes rules can change, rules can be broken, but in the game of life, these universal rules, these universal truths or laws cannot be changed or broken. He says the playing field in the game of life is our mind. When we're playing a game, we ask ourselves, what is the aim and the purpose? And then what are the rules governing the game? He says, in the game of life, our aim is to increase our awareness of things of greater significance, and also achieving our goals, realizing our desires. The rules only reach so far as to indicate the way in which we should go about realizing our desires. The desires themselves must only be the individual's own concern. He says it takes a lifetime of practice to really use these rules wisely, because thinking, although it seems to us like thinking is free and we can completely control the way that we think, it's not fully in our control. Our thinking has definite paths that it continues to go down out of habit. Our mind will naturally go and follow the tracks that we've laid down throughout our entire life and through our inner conversations that we have on a consistent basis. Our brains always want to go back to the familiar. So that's why he's saying, it's not as free as we may think. We're not just able to just change it just by thinking, I want to change it. It takes a practice. It takes exercising this muscle of continuously choosing the new thoughts that you want to feed. He says we must change our mind and our inner speech repetitively. And then anybody, when you do this, can realize your desire. He says to play the game of life successfully, we must become aware of every mental activity, for this mental activity is the cause of the outer phenomena of life. He says there is no opponent in the game of life. There is only the goal. So keep your focus on what do you desire rather than focus on the enemy, rather than focus on what you do not want to realize. Because by putting your focus on what you do not want to realize, you're just creating that because your focus is on that. He says don't make making money the goal. He says the goal should be the wise, productive use of money. Because when you're saying it like this, you're assuming I already have the money, right? My inner conversations are already based on the premise that I already have money. So now the question becomes, how do I use my money productively, in the best way, in the wise way? Right? So we can make these simple shifts in our mind. So instead of thinking, I want money, money is coming to me, you think from the place of, I already have money, so how do I effectively use my resources to continue to build that? It's all about where you're coming from. What is your lens that you're viewing life from? What do you view yourself? What is your self-concept? How do you view your life? He says the man struggling for money only declares his lack of money. And it's the same thing with love, and it's the same thing with your body. It's the same thing with anything that you desire to manifest. He says keep your eye on the goal, not the lack of the goal. In a game, if you don't practice, even the most profound knowledge of the game is going to produce no desired results. You're not going to win the game. Just like any talent that you have that is not used, just like any limb that is not exercised over and over again, slumbers and atrophies. He says we must be doers, not just hearers of the word. What would you think, say, and do if you were already who you want to be? Be this inwardly. A change of attitude changes your life. He says, life, although it looks like it's happening in the external, playing out here in time and space, the real moves take place within the playing field of our own mind. Chapter 6 is called Time, Times and a Half. So at one of Neville Goddard's lectures that he hosted in LA, somebody asked him to interpret this Bible verse, which, you know, it was a Bible verse that had the quote in it, time, times and a half. It's kind of a long one, so I'm not going to read it. But he basically confessed that he did not know the meaning of that particular verse. And he replied to this person that he did not know the meaning of this verse. He did not know what time, times and a half meant, but, you know, he would get back to him. So there was somebody else in the audience who heard on this conversation, and she said to herself, if the mind behaves according to the assumption which it states, then I will find the true answer to that question and I will tell it to Neville. So what this woman did was that night, she assumed that she already knew the answer. She already knew what this Bible verse meant, and she just trusted that while she was sleeping, her greater self, her higher self, would find the answer for her. So what happened was around 5 a.m., she woke up in the middle of the night. She was half dreamy state, half awake, which is what we call the SAT state, the state akin to sleep. And a picture came into her mind that basically implied to her and gave to her the message of what she needed to know of what the passage meant and what the passage's symbology was. And the meaning that she basically got from it was that a time means to perform the imaginary act, which implies the fulfillment of the wish. Times means repeat the imaginary action over and over again. And a half means the movement of falling asleep while performing the imaginary action, because you're half awake, half asleep, so it can be said to be a half or a part of time. So basically the point of this passage was, how do we realize our desires? Is by performing the imaginary act, which implies our fulfillment, over and over and over again while we are in the state akin to sleep. But the point of Neville really sharing this story too is to illustrate that we're never lost at an opportunity to test out this law, test out this understanding for either ourselves or for other people. Every little thing that happens in our life, we can choose to see it differently, just like this woman was dedicated to understand the meaning of this passage, which that without actually knowing it consciously, she assumed that she knew it, and therefore she tested out this law and she was able to come to the answer. So this is really what we can do in both big areas and small areas of our life. Just assume that we know. Chapter 7 is called Be Ye Wise As Serpents. So serpents are the symbol of power and endless growth and self-reproduction, because serpents have the ability to form its skin by ossifying a portion of itself, and it has the skill of shedding its skin as it outgrows it. So to be wise as a serpent means to learn how do we shed our old skin and our old environment. In other words, how do we die to the old and embody the new? He says that the wise and spiritual man knows that everything outside of a man's body is also a part of himself. Everything in his world is outpicturing his consciousness. The spiritual man is not interlocked and attached to his environment, but the natural man, the 3D man, the man who is stuck in logic and his senses, are stuck and attached to his environment and therefore cannot overcome it, rise above it. To outgrow our old self, we have to not be so attached to it. We have to understand that the truth of reality is consciousness. And with that truth, with that knowing, with that understanding, it feels good to tap into our higher self. It feels good to expand ourselves into this new vision that we're creating, to shed our old skin, because we know, it's not really dying. It's not going anywhere. It's still existing in the ethers, but it's transforming into the new because we have that creator power. He says, when your desire feels natural in this deep state of meditation or sats, as your spiritual higher self returns from that spiritual state to this physical state, your spiritual body creates an invisible bridge of incidents to link the two states where you currently are physically in your 3D to the spiritual world where you have entered into your imagination. The bridge of events just naturally happens from your higher self. So when you open your eyes for meditation, he says you are haunted with the sense of a double identity, with the knowledge that there is a natural body and a spiritual body. He says this concept that man consciously or unconsciously determines the conditions of life by imagination leads to the conclusion that this solid world is just a construction of our mind, which at first, to our common sense, we reject that idea. However, he says we should remember that most concept which common sense first rejected, man afterwards was forced to accept it. We later learn through scientific discoveries, through expanded awareness over time, That what people, like Einstein, for example, they were once looked as crazy in their time, but now we know that he had a lot of truth and reality in the things that he said. If you can lift yourself from the senses to a state of consciousness that you desire to realize, and you remain there, you persist in that state, then he says you form that state around you, and everyone in your external world will see it. They will see the changes because you will get there. The bridge of incidents will happen. That part's out of our control. Our part is to declare it. Our part is to rise above the senses and live in that state of consciousness. Your life expresses one thing only, your state of consciousness. Be faithful to the state that you desire. Don't continue to jump from state to state. Wait until, if you have a desire, wait until that desire takes form, becomes an objective fact. He says patience is necessary for this. And then what happens when you do realize that desire, you have that patience, when you get your desire, you strengthen your belief. And when your belief is strengthened, that's when, the interval of time between your manifestation shortens. He says having this understanding is the secret of patience. You'll easily be able to have patience if you know for 100% fact that your desire is coming. Then you have all the patience in the world because you can just feel as if you already have it and you're good to go. You're not anxious about it because you know it's here. You know it's on its way. You know it's already existing in your consciousness, and it's only a matter of time before it shows up in your 3D. Chapter 8 is called The Water and the Blood. So according to the Gospel and Epistle of John, not only must man be born again, but he must be born again of water and blood. So these two inward experiences are linked with two outward rituals, baptism and communion. But Neville explains how it's not really the physical outward act or the use of water and wine to bring about the desired change of mind. He says there's a hidden meaning behind blood and water. And the hidden meaning is this. The knowledge of what to do is considered water, and actually doing it is blood. He says the outward ceremonies cannot accomplish this. Your savior and solution of your problem cannot be accomplished by knowledge only. It has to be applied knowledge. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and continue persisting in that. And this is the symbol of blood and water. He says a little bit of knowledge, if carried out in action, is way more profitable than having so much knowledge that we neglect to carry out in action. In other words, stop learning so much and actually start implementing, actually start experiencing, taking action, and seeing how this law works in your life, because it is only through experience that we're able to truly learn and experience the profit and results. We have the power to be the creator of our lives, and not only that, but to actually help other people change their state of being when we assume the best of them. He gives an example of a teacher who, the teacher and all of the principals and every teacher in the school was ready to expel this 16-year-old girl because according to the story, this girl was a 16-year-old girl who used vile language. She was rude, crude, and unethical, and she was about to be expelled. So what this teacher did was she imagined in her mind's eye the child smiling at her and saying hi to her, which is something that she never did because she just little girl with attitude, right? So she did this over and over and over again in her mind until it felt real and she fell asleep with that feeling. The very next morning, he said, that girl said good morning with a smile. And after that day, the girl continued day in and day out in that transformed state that the teacher now saw that student in. By the end of the week, everybody, all the teachers, all the principals, they noted the change and the expulsion was revoked. This is the power that we have to pull people out of negative states. We have to actually see this person in the desired state rather than the state that we are seeing with our senses. This gives us a lot of power, right? This is like a big, big statement that we basically have the godly power within us to change this world, right? This shows us that we hold the responsibility for all changes in our life. Without the teacher's decision to change her mind about the child, and without that imaginative power to carry it out, the teacher could have never redeemed that student. But you cannot know your redemptive power of imagination without actually experiencing it. So get to work, guys. Now, chapter 9 is called A Mystical View. He sums up this book by saying that the Bible is a collection of parables and is a revelation of truth expressed in symbolism to reveal the laws and purposes of mind of man. As we become aware of the deeper meanings in the parables than those which are usually assigned to them, we are apprehending them mystically. He says, accept no intermediary between yourself and God. Turn from all people who would offer to do for you what you could do for yourself and should do for yourself, far better for your own self. Every time you exercise your own imagination on behalf of another, be it good, bad, or indifferent, you have literally done that to Christ. For Christ is awakened human imagination. And that is a mystical view. If you guys made it to the end of this video, you guys know I do this in every video. Leave a comment down below with the genie emoji, letting me know that you made it to the end of this video, that you're actually watching this video, you're here with me, you're learning some stuff from it, and let me know what was your biggest takeaway from Neville Goddard's 9th book. Make sure that you subscribe to this video to get new videos every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and without further ado, I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Love you.